From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. Leading the news today, Alabama's unemployment rate for March dropped to a record low of 2.9%. That's down just 1/10 of a point from February's 3% rate, but it matches the record low set in September of 2019 before the pandemic. The March rate represents about 17,000 fewer unemployed people compared to the same time last year. Shelby County had the state's lowest jobless rate at 1.7%, followed by Coleman County at 1.8%. Wilcox County had the state's highest unemployment rate at 8.8%. When the legislature adjourned last week and lawmakers headed back home, they left behind a stack of legislation on Governor Ivey's desk. This week has been decision time for the governor on whether to sign bills, veto them, or let them become law without her signature. Among the priority legislation she has signed this week are the $8.2 billion Education Trust Fund, several tax cut bills, a telemedicine measure, and legislation putting stricter job search requirements on those applying for unemployment benefits. Senate Bill 224 from Senator Arthur Orr requires those on unemployment to contact prospective employers at least 3 times a week to remain eligible. Senate Bill 272 from Senator Dan Roberts starts the process for regulating telemedicine in Alabama. Currently, there are few rules or standards for telemedicine, and leaders have warned that could lead to scams. House Bill 435 from Representative Rich Wingo increases the cap for a student loan repayment program for highly qualified math and science teachers. House Bill 220, sponsored by Representative Terry Collins, and Senate Bill 200 by Senator Roger Smitherman, make changes to the Alabama Literacy Act. Collins' bill makes technical changes to the law to ensure it works as intended to help improve the state's lagging reading scores. Smitherman's bill delays the law's holdback provision by 2 years. As originally enacted, the Alabama Literacy Act would prevent third-grade students who cannot read proficiently from being promoted to the 4th grade beginning this year. As amended, the law delays that provision until spring of 2024. Another bill we've been tracking this session is now law. House Bill 50 from State Representative Rolanda Hollis is known as the Period Poverty Bill. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith has the full story.
3 years ago, 14-year-old twins Brooke and Brianna Bennett started Women in Training, or WIT. Their WIT kits contain menstrual and multiple feminine care products, along with a medically approved brochure on how the menstrual cycle works. To date, they've given more than 10,000 WIT kits to preteen and teen girls in Montgomery and Tuskegee. But their mother says in the beginning,
and then after a few months, Brooke's like, wow, no matter how many of these WIT kits we give out, we'll never reach every girl in Alabama. We need to get the states to handle this.
So they reached out to State Representative Rolanda Hollis, and this year the ladies passed HB 50, which sets aside $200,000 to purchase only menstrual pads for more than 50,000 lower-income girls.
These products are for our female girls from 5th to 12th grade at no cost. So it's something for the schools to start with, and hopefully as we go along that we can increase the amount within our schools.
2 Montgomery Public Schools officials appreciate their work.
Our partnerships and for those who had a vision to do this is going to be more impactful than we'll ever know.
When I was teaching, to even speak of this was taboo. You know, we didn't speak of it. I was that teacher who always had the pads inside of the file cabinet, and a student could walk in and just point and I'd know what to do because we couldn't speak of it.
And the Women in Training founders?
I'm so excited. We're so excited to help the girls in need, and we want to keep trying to do more community service for them. We want to, expand and try to help, more people in need, because it just goes to the public schools. We also want to help out private schools and everybody else.
These girls would miss school because they're on their menstrual cycle and
don't have the products that they need to stay clean and healthy, and they don't want to go to school and get embarrassed. And so I really hope that having this bill be signed by the governor and putting this bill into action, that these girls can attend school, which would bring the education rate in Alabama up. And so I'm really just hoping that this bill can contribute to just making Alabama a better place.
For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
It's no secret that the Alabama legislature is dominated by Republicans who hold supermajorities in both chambers. And while plenty of legislation is bipartisan, it's a challenge for members in the Democratic minority to affect legislation and have their voices heard. Capital Journal's Randy Scott has more.
The House Democratic Caucus began the session with a clear pro-growth, pro-innovation, and pro-Alabama agenda that would help and rebuild Alabama. Although we were able to accomplish some good things, we also saw many bad pieces of legislation pass, and to be honest, we endured a whole lot of ugly. In fact, we had so much ugly this year, we probably have taken care of it for the next few years.
The House Minority Caucus says the 2022 regular session was one of many missed opportunities to do positive work for Alabamians.
Why would anyone prioritize permitless concealed gun carry? Why was it so unbelievably urgent to ban critical race theory, which is not even taught in Alabama's K-12 schools? Why would one think that making it harder for people to vote should be at the top of their agenda? As I said, it just doesn't make any sense.
It was about finding practical and sensible ways to help the people we serve. It's about making sure that a little girl can go to a doctor, or for a son to finally earn that A in math. It was about making sure that an elderly grandmother with disability would not have to stand in line for hours in the cold just to cast her vote.
Caucus members say some bipartisanship did help pass some proposals.
We have been able to afford the significant improvements that we will soon see in all of Alabama's schools. That's a positive. We were able to secure raises for teachers and give retired educators a bonus. That's a positive. We were able to fund teachers' aides for classroom around the state, as well as strengthen dual enrollment. That's a positive.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
This week, the Equal Justice Initiative unveiled its newly expanded National Memorial for Peace and Justice in downtown Montgomery, a major new sculpture and nearly 50 marker monuments that document lynchings are now on display for visitors. EJI's Brian Stevenson said markers documenting lynchings have now been erected in 20 states.
Today we're excited to be expanding this site, the National Memorial, which has also seen nearly 1 million visitors since we've opened in 2018, and we now anticipate to see even more. We wanted to have visitors experience a little more detail about the lynching violence that we memorialize here. And so the nearly 50 new markers that you'll see in this expanded space will provide more detailed accounts about how this violence took place in some of these communities. And it will be the most extensive narration of a lynching that we have at the memorial, and it will reflect what's happened in communities all across the country. There are 18 states represented in these markers, and more will be added in the coming months. We also now have a new sculpture that will just kind of celebrate the work that people and communities have been doing around the country to recognize this history in their own communities.
Dr. Scott Harris, Alabama's public health officer, this week tested positive for COVID-19. He said he's only experiencing mild symptoms, which he attributes to being fully vaccinated and boosted. He encouraged all eligible Alabamians to do the same as the new BA2 variant begins to spread. Doc, we wish you a speedy recovery as you isolate and look forward to having you back on the show very soon. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Next, I'm joined by Congressman Barry Moore of Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. Congressman, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate you inviting me. Happy to be here.
Congress is on recess this week, and so you are spending the time here in the district doing district work. What all have you done this week? What are your plans?
Well, we've been to Mobile. Austell launched a new steel manufacturing facility to match up with the aluminum facility, and so there, and toured Airbus as well. So in Montgomery today, be at the chamber events tomorrow, and then I think we're touring a couple of manufacturing facilities here as well. And you know, Alabama, from the north it's rockets, to the south it's ships and airplanes, and everywhere in between is peanuts and that sort of thing. And so just to learn a little bit, because even though I have the 2nd Congressional District, my vote impacts the entire state and the federal budgets and that sort of thing. So we think it's important to understand the industries that we can help in the state.
How important, you know, most of your service has been during COVID, some type of COVID situation. So, you know, how important is it now that things are a little bit more relaxed to get around the district, meet folks, listen to folks, your constituents?
Well, you know, I think it's extremely important, and I don't think anybody can question the team that we've put together and the work ethic. We've been in the district, and you know, I hear people all the time saying, hey, we've seen you here, seen you there, and so it's just important. You know, when we campaigned, we ran, and I told everybody, if you'll campaign among the people, you'll govern for the people, and if you campaign from an ivory tower, ultimately you govern from an ivory tower. And so we made it a point to be in the district, to meet the people. We were truly a grassroots campaign, and so we're trying to not lose that. I mean, in D.C. sometimes you get pulled in 4,000 or 5,000 directions, but at the end of the day, the people in the district are who really put us there, and that's who we want to stay in touch with.
Well, I'm eager to talk about federal issues. You know, we're just finishing up a legislative session, so we've been laser focused on state issues really for the past 4 months. But there are a lot of really important national issues that y'all are involved in Congress. I want to start with inflation, because it seems to be really the headline issue. This week was announced another 8.5% increase in inflation. It's really just it has been painful for everyday Americans, for consumers. It's the prices of goods have gone up so much. A lot of finger pointing on who and what are to blame for these things. My question to you as a congressman is, what can be done? What can the federal government, what can Congress do to address this problem?
Well, first we got to stop the runaway spending. You know, every time we print $1 in D.C., it's paper and ink. It has no value. But every time we print one, it cuts the one in your wallet to its buying power. And as you increase that, the velocity of that currency, there's so much of it out there chasing so few goods that the prices begin to increase. And so you create a demand. It's an artificial inflated demand. And it's a problem, and we were like prophets. We told them, you keep spending this money, like you're spending this money, inflation's going to be the result. And sure enough, we spent more money now fighting COVID than we did fighting World War II in today's dollars. And when you put that kind of money into an economy, you obviously are going to see inflation. And so it doesn't take an economist to know that. It just takes a little common sense. But that is the first thing we've got to do, is get this out of control spending. You know, typically politicians, and especially the Democrats, sometimes want to throw money at an issue rather than actually get into the weeds and fix it. And so we've created a lot of this in D.C. by printing money.
Well, in terms of addressing inflation, I'm thinking it might be painful. I'm thinking back to, you know, the late 70s, early 80s with Paul Volcker, you know, coming in and really raising interest rates. Had to be done, arguably, probably the long-term solution, but man, for 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, it's really painful stuff. So do you foresee things like that, the Americans having to endure some pain in order to achieve the long-term goal of tapping down inflation?
Well, it's a dual approach. I think obviously we have to raise interest rates. We have to slow, and that will be some pain in that process. But one of the things we introduced a bill, I'm having it drafted as you and I sit here and speak today, and I haven't mentioned it to anybody, but it's to allow people to work tax-free for 6 months. No federal income tax for 6 months, because it's a problem we created with the federal government, and you know, they want to print another $2 trillion here and $3 trillion there. Well, we only raise about $3.6 trillion a year in federal revenue on income tax. So the 100,000 less and working couples that file for 100,000 or less, if we can let them work for 6 months tax-free, then that puts people back into the workforce. So then as goods increase, as you increase production of goods, those dollars chasing those goods will counter that inflation, but it'll also give the American people more spending money. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to come at it from the standpoint of, this is just a bill I'm introducing, but we got to give the American people some relief. We saw this coming. We created this problem. We got to put people back to work and not create a labor market vacuum where those goods are out there. There's not enough goods. We know we got transportation issues and supply chain issues, but we want to make sure that people go back to work and produce products. So therefore, we'll hopefully see the increase in products, a decrease in inflation, and thus printing money, more money to circulate in the economy. Hopefully we'll offset some of that.
A related issue is energy, gas prices, and that's where everybody's really feeling it. The president has done three main things: releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, enacted this use it or lose it policy, basically trying to get folks who have these federal land leases to drill, or else they might lose their lease, and raising the ethanol limits for summer driving. In your view, what else does he need to do, or does Congress need to do to get gas prices down?
Well, you know, the permits are one thing. We've got to make sure we allow people to get in and start producing. Some of those wells are not, they might have got permitted years ago, but the process of getting, Steve Scalise said it like this: there's a lot of trucks trying to get on the interstate, but if the access road is so limited to get in, then you don't have as many trucks on the road. Same with this drilling process. There may be a bunch of leases out there that are approved, but the permitting process has been slow walked by this administration. Now, sure, we've got to get those permits. The leases are available, but not all those wells are going to produce. That's one thing we could do. Another thing we could do, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR we call it, was actually there for emergencies or for storms, whether it be, whether if we had a natural disaster or actually an emergency. And so Biden has used the SPR to try to relieve this demand. But if we would just drill here, and I tell everybody, Biden's energy policies were basically this: you shut down the Keystone Pipeline day one. He did that with the stroke of a pen. That was going to help us produce and bring energy from Canada. Then you give Russia a green light on Nord Stream 2. Then you beg OPEC to increase production, and you buy your solar panels from China. The Biden administration, their policies are what's failing the American people. We were energy independent under the previous administration, and so they need to, these permits, they say they need to quit slow walking permits and let us go back to producing. And there's so many things we could be doing, that we should be doing, that we're not doing. And he said he wanted to kill the fossil fuel industry when he was running as a candidate, and now the American people are starting to see the results of those failed policies.
But don't Democrats and the Biden administration have a point in that moving to some of these greener policies, specifically electric cars, other greener policies, won't that help? Isn't that part of the solution to get us less dependent on foreign oil?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we saw in time, maybe, Todd, when the technology's there, but the private sector, you and I growing up, our parents always said, hey, turn the light off when you leave the room. And since we weren't paying the bill, we would, and we'd go like, well, what's the deal about turning the light off? But now when you start paying the bill, you'll flip that switch off. It has to make economic sense. Yeah, we're great, save the environment, but the economy, the technology has to be there to make sense to flip the switch. And so the economy, the economics of it have to drive that decision as well. And right now what's happened in Europe is now they're getting 40% of their energy from Russia because they tried to rush into the Green New Deal, and now we see what Putin's doing. And so we need to be able to provide those companies energy. Natural gas, one of the cleanest forms of energy in the world. We got a ton of it here. We can get a ton of it from Canada. We could help these European countries become dependent on us for energy, and then force China and Russia and Iran to negotiate between themselves for energy. And see, that puts those three bad actors in that region kind of, if you will, at each other, rather than and us pull Europe out of the process, and let's sell them energy from America and make sure we make energy independent America.
It seems like Republicans and Democrats are talking past each other on this issue, because a lot of Democrats, it's a non-starter for any more new production of American oil. Republicans are the exact opposite. So given that the Democrats are going to continue to control the White House for another 2 years, is there a way to persuade? Is there a middle ground? Do you see that as even possible?
I hope so. But I think that more than what we can do as Republicans, I think the American people, I think the pain at the pump is going to send a message that maybe you and I couldn't convey to our friends across the aisle, but I think they're starting to hear from the people themselves. I mean, they're feeling it at the pumps. And so, whether or not we can persuade, and there may be some common ground, but, we produce fossil fuels cleaner than any country in the world, and ours is 30% cleaner than what Russia's producing. Why are we going to allow Russia and Venezuela to produce what we can produce here? And also, why don't we put money into the pockets of other tyrants around the globe? It just doesn't make sense.
Let me switch gears to an issue closer to home, and that's with Veterans Affairs. You're on the Veterans Affairs Committee. It's no secret we have had issues with our VA system in Central Alabama for years, if not decades. It used to be really front page news. I wondered if you could provide an update. Are there still big issues at Central Alabama VA? Have there been improvements?
You know, we've visited the facilities. Obviously, we've been in office 14 months, but you know, our office, we've solved over 1,000 cases for veterans in 14 months, and that's some IRS issues. But last week, I think we announced we'd resolved nearly 1,000 cases. I feel like the VA is doing a better job, and of course, we're proactive in trying to make sure that process is taking place. So, you know, right now, there are a few that fall through the cracks, and granted, we're trying to make sure that the technology can kind of talk between agencies to make sure that some of this stuff just doesn't fall in a black hole. But, you know, there's some things we're trying to do to improve technology, and we're trying to stay in touch with the VA. But right now, I think it's moving, it's improving, and so we're going to continue to move in that direction.
Let's talk a little bit about the future. At this point, I think it's fair to say Republicans are likely to take the House of Representatives. There's all the, you know, prognostications out there look at that. We don't know about the Senate. Still going to be sharply divided one way or the other. Certainly the Democrats are going to remain in control of the White House for at least another 2 years. So just assuming that's the case, what can realistically get done? What common ground can be found with a Republican House, a divided Senate, and a Democratic White House?
Well, you know, I mentioned this to Leader McCarthy. I think we have to make sure we don't just take a knee, but Newt Gingrich was really, really instrumental in the contract with America, and I think the way he put it together, and he got people on board, he checked the issues, and they ran on those issues, and they made a commitment to make it work, and did that with the Democrat-controlled White House. And so Newt, we've been in touch with him. He actually spoke with us a couple nights before we left D.C., and I'm encouraging McCarthy to follow that roadmap that he laid out with the contract with America as we work through the commitment with America. And so I think there's some opportunities to move to some common ground. And you know, the one thing that discourages us sometimes as Republicans seems that we take a knee. And right now we're kind of deep in our own territory. We've got to move the ball back to midfield. So you know, there's some things I think we can get done. They're going to need some help on the debt ceiling, but we're going to need a border wall. So there's some ways we can look at some things and negotiate some deals that I think that make sense, so we can pull the White House in and hopefully get the American people to agree on as well.
Well, you know, it strikes me because being in the minority can sometimes be, I don't know, a little simpler. A lot of voting no, right?
Yeah.
And but let's just say you're in the majority next year. You know, it's now the onus is on you to reach 218 to move legislation. So looking toward that, are you prepared to start, you know, voting yes or playing ball on some of these big bills?
Yeah, you know, Newt Gingrich has always a yes if. So and so I think there's always an opportunity for a yes if we can do this. And so that's how we want to approach it. And I think that McCarthy, I'm a member of the House Freedom Caucus, and our numbers are growing. And we understand that sometimes there are a lot of those guys that vote no just for the sake of voting no.
Well, that's kind of why I asked.
Yeah. And so but when you get into leadership, instead of cutting a bad deal across the aisle, if we can get a yes if we have to have the debt ceiling raised, Jim Jordan and I were talking about this the other night, if we build a border wall, you know, if we do this, we'll do this. If we cut this, we'll do this. And so I am hopeful that with the House Freedom Caucus and the leadership that we've got there and the brand that they've developed, where the American people trust that brand, is to say, you know, we're going to go with this here rather than going to the Democrats and get some horrible stuff in some bills. You know, if there's some ways that we can negotiate, you know, yes, we'll give you the votes here, Mr. McCarthy, if we can get this. I think that's the approach, and I think the American people will understand that, especially if we do a good job communicating.
But that can be a risky proposition because there is so much politically, folks over the years have learned from, you know, just saying no, voting no, and maybe you negotiate up to that point, and then they still vote no. So, you know, and several of those folks are in the Freedom Caucus.
Sure.
Do you think there'll be a change in that sort of mentality, given that there's just such an incentive to throw rocks instead of working together?
I sure hope so. I mean, who knows? You don't know what individual people are going to do until the time comes. But we need to lead, and I think they need to understand that. And so, America's I tell everybody, we're in the emergency room. We've got to triage this thing and try to fix it. And so we need to try to work together where we can and try to make sure that we get some good stuff. Because if we don't, say for example, just that example I used, raise the debt ceiling, build a border wall, right? So if we don't require them to build a border wall, they'll go to the dams and cut some horrible deal and get some terrible stuff in that bill, and they'll still get the 218 they need, and there'll be no border wall. And so we just have to make that argument to our team and to the people in our party across the board to stick together. The Democrats do pretty good at sticking together, and we've got to do a better job. And look, as Republicans, we believe that the ultimate minority is the individual. So, I get to vote in my district, you get to have a say in your life in the process, and that's really the true minority you represent. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that, you can do how you want to do and you can vote how you want to do, but at the end of the day, either they're going to get a bad deal or we can put this together and get something you really want out of it. And so, hopefully we'll make some differences and have an opportunity to improve on policy and really make a meaningful difference.
Well, we will be watching. I really appreciate your time to come in to share with us on Capitol Journal.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Collier Tynes, CEO of Voices for Alabama's Children. Collier, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd. I'm excited.
Tell our audience a little bit more about Voices and what your organization does here in the state.
Sure. So Voices for Alabama's Children was founded 30 years ago, actually, by a group of courageous leaders at the Alabama Power Foundation, Children's of Alabama, as well as the Alabama chapter of the Academy of Pediatrics and the Junior League of Birmingham. And these courageous leaders recognized the need for a multi-issue research and advocacy organization for children so that we could speak to the needs that we're seeing for Alabama's children and make positive change. And in 1994, they actually published the first publication of its kind called the Alabama Kids Count Data Book. And since that time, we have tracked and documented leading indicators in child well-being to not only know where we are, but see if what we're doing is actually working and make positive change. So as a result of this effort, Voices actually has one of the longest track records of policy wins in the state, because when we use facts, not the latest comment on Facebook, but facts to actually inform us of where we are, then we can actually be unified in singing from the same songbook and creating the change that we want to seek to do better by our children and families.
Well, every year you release, like you said, the Kids Count Data Book. I look forward to it every year because I like data, but also it provides that benchmark. You compare it to last year and 2 or 3 years ago, or going back or forward. So this year's report, which you have right here, was released last week.
Yes.
What are some of the biggest takeaways in this year's Kids Count Data Book?
Sure. Well, in today's world of noise, disinformation, and continued stress from the pandemic, these numbers really command our attention. At this point, a lot of us have heard that less than 24% of our fourth graders in Alabama are proficient in math, and about half are proficient in reading. But more than that, we've got to look at the other indicators that impact child well-being, such as your economic stability and your health. And we know that less than 24% of children in Alabama are living in poverty, and 1 in 5 are food insecure. So as we talk about, how do we improve math scores? Well, if you don't know if you're going to have food tonight, or if you saw something traumatic in your neighborhood this past week, I don't think you're going to be focused on math.
I was going to say those numbers seem to kind of overlap. I mean, if it's almost pretty close together, and I really it maybe does inform the education conversation, because there's a lot of talk about education this session, but I didn't hear these poverty numbers.
Exactly. And so we've got to be paying attention to how do we make sure that parents, caregivers, providers, communities, that every single child is able to be wrapped around supported families and communities and flourish into successful adults. When I look at these numbers, these are not the outcomes of bad teachers or bad parents or bad providers. These are the outcomes of under-resourced communities, especially in our Black Belt and rural counties. We have got to be paying attention to what communities have access to in order to support the families who live in them, and therefore their families can support their children.
Well, there are many statistics in this book, and I recommend folks look into it. One thing that stuck out to me was looking at the section on safety and permanency for kids and how important that is, and looking at foster kids and how kids get into foster care. We talked a lot about substance abuse here in the legislative session, also mental health and the gains that we're trying to make there. One statistic that stood out, 48% of kids that ended up in foster care are there because of substance abuse issues with the parents.
Sure.
What does that tell us?
So when you enter foster care, you can have multiple issues for why or reasons why you enter the foster care system, right? But the major driver to foster care entry in Alabama is parental substance abuse. So this goes back right to my point that I just made. We need to start looking at all of the numbers in this book, not as the outcomes of bad parents or caregivers or teachers or communities, but we need to start looking at them as the outcomes of parents and caregivers who need our help. And so if we know that a leading driver to child well-being is whether or not this child has access to a parent who is able to care for them, then we've got to start supporting the leverage point in supporting families. When families have the resources that they need to care for their children, our children thrive. It is a fantasy to think that school can replace parents and caregivers. While our education system, our K-12 educators are working so hard every single day, and they're seeing the increases in child mental health issues, right? I mean, that's been a major topic of conversation this session. But we've got to start thinking about how do we make sure that both families and children have access to the mental health services that they need so that when they get to the desk, they're ready to learn.
Well, let's talk about the session because we just finished. There was a lot of talk about record budgets, education and general fund, talk about record investments, things like that on some of these issues you're talking about. Was there any progress made towards some of your goals?
Yes. In fact, there were a lot of education issues that I was really proud to see the legislature, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, work together to respond to the math crisis in Alabama. So we had the Numeracy Act pass, right? We also had a $17.8 million investment in licensed child care providers. Unless you've been living under a rock since the pandemic, you know that child care is a leading issue in our state's fluctuations in our labor force, right? You can't, if you have a child who's under 5, you can't go to work unless you have access to affordable, quality, safe child care. And by the way, the Department of Human Resources has been working very diligently to use ARPA funds to support some of these providers. But this is the first state investment that we're making in the workforce of today and tomorrow. Because while our child care providers are caring for children from birth to 3, 4, and 5, they're caring for our kids at the most critical time of brain development, right? And so we've got to make sure that our child care providers are supported as they support our economy of today, and they're supporting the future education of our kids as they start into K-12 education.
Well, and there's been a lot of talk about that over the years in terms of safeguards, right? Because it's not enough just to have a daycare facility, child care facility. You need to make sure it's safe. A lot of those, and there were some bills this year updating our standards and requirements to make sure that parents can be relatively assured that the people working at a daycare are responsible and safe and don't have a problematic background?
Sure. I mean, we've got to make sure that parents need to be able to leave their children where they know that their child is safe, right? Where they know that, okay, when I go to work, I don't have to worry about my child because I know that he's with staff that have been background checked. He's in a facility that is safe. We've got to make sure that we're covering the cost of quality, Todd. And because the reality is that for every safety standard that we have, that is a higher cost for providers. And so making sure that we are covering the cost of quality is going to be really critical. And we need to be thinking about what investments can we be making in our child care providers so that every parent in Alabama has access to safe, affordable, quality child care.
I think you're right that the pandemic really highlighted this issue because, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. I mean, I did not have a proper appreciation for just how critical it was, access to child care was until getting into the pandemic.
Right.
Schools are shut down, a lot of daycares are shut down, and, suddenly parents can't work. If you got, like you said, children under 5, you can't work. It's hard. They're crawling all over you,
Right.
So do you see that as a silver lining that in places like here in the State House, maybe even in Congress, that visibility and just that awareness from the pandemic may advance some of these goals down the field?
Yes. It not only has raised awareness, but if we don't do something about this, we can't get Alabamians fully back to work. I mean, the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is clear. We know that people disproportionately impacted by this pandemic and their inability to get back into the workforce are mothers and caregivers. Because if they don't have access to quality, affordable childcare, then, well, number one, we have household incomes with if you have 2 household incomes, you're going, wait a second, I'm paying 30, 40, 50% of my income for childcare. We can't afford for both of us to work, right? Now, if you're a single parent, we are creating unnecessary burdens for our single parents who are trying to do the work of 2. And if they don't have access to childcare, especially our hourly workers, think about this. If you're an hourly worker, if you're a mother who is working for $24,000 a year and your daycare closes or you don't have access to daycare, you have to make the decision, do I go to work to make an income, or do I stay at home and care for my child? And that is not a decision that any Alabamian should have to make. So we've got to do something about this childcare crisis.
Let me ask you, there might be a lot of folks hearing all this and hearing some of these alarming statistics, seeing the Kids Count data book, and wondering what can they do? What can they do to, help in this kind of situation? What would you say to viewers who had that question?
What I would say to viewers who had that question is, one, you are doing a phenomenal job for yourself in just looking at facts. Okay, so this is the gold standard of data for children in Alabama from birth to 18. And so I would look at the data and say, and I would look at not only the statewide, but what makes this book unique is you can look at it at the county level. And so we know that for every county, there might be different reasons why we're seeing literacy rates change. There might be different reasons why some counties have higher high school dropout rates than others. So I encourage you to look at your local data and to prioritize, okay, where are we seeing the most amount of bleed, right? Where are the real issues? And they might shock you. And when you know the real issues, you can then know what you need to prioritize and focus on.
And so where can people find this book online?
So we can actually find it at our website, alavoices.org. And if you hover over the research tab, you'll see the 2021 data book where you can purchase a copy or you can just use the free version online. You can also look at county data profiles. So if you just want to look at your county's stats on children's health, education, financial security, and safety, you can do that. And you can also look at the data on online mapping. So you can look at it by your legislative district as well. So like how many first-class pre-K sites are in your district, or how many births were paid for by Medicaid, what that rate is. You can see all of it at the county level.
Well, I know a lot of our lawmakers listening will find that very interesting. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you this. You know, this is an era of politics and just political crassness in many ways. We're entering a campaign season. You know, in many ways that was reflected in the legislative session.
Yeah.
Does that make it difficult? And the reason I ask that is this. You know, politics is made up of politicians. Politicians like to win. That means a lot of times they get on issues that will give them political wins. You know, this is difficult. This is not fun. You know, these are hard choices, hard decisions. Does that make it difficult for you to press in lawmakers, the governor, whomever, into paying attention and really focusing on these issues?
Well, you know, my response to that is that as leaders, it's important for us to be honest with ourselves about what the real solutions are and to communicate those things to the people that we're leading. And I was really proud to see lawmakers look at our math crisis and go, we've got to respond to this. And it may not be politically fun to respond to right now in an election season, but you know what? They did. And kids right now sitting in classrooms are going to benefit from that. And children don't care about what's Republican or what's Democrat. And you know what? I firmly believe that the majority of Alabamians are really way more focused on whether or not this state is an easy place to work, live, raise a family, than they are, you know, whether or not politicians are making the right statement that they want to hear. I think we really need, it really just reminds me, today's political environment reminds me of the importance of facts, of data, and that driving our priorities, not the latest comment on Facebook.
Well, thank you for coming in and sharing some of these facts with us, and we look forward to having you back on.
Thanks so much, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Next, I'm joined by David Cole of the Business Council of Alabama. David, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
Could you explain a little bit more about what Business Council of Alabama, BCA, does as an organization here in the state?
Sure. BCA is primarily an advocacy organization representing approximately 3,000 businesses of all sizes, small, medium, and large. And in essence, by doing that, we represent approximately 750,000 working Alabama families.
Well, I know that BCA has traditionally had a pretty big presence here in the State House. We're finished with this legislative session. We're now a week out, maybe a little bit of perspective from that week out. From your perspective, representing the business community, what were your big takeaways from this session?
Well, first of all, you know, when the session started back in January, that seems like it was almost a year ago.
Yeah.
You know, but I think a lot of people have probably forgotten about all the investments that were made in Alabama through the ARPA funding. You know, we came in early January and worked through about the first 2 weeks, and then we went into a special session to utilize those funds and invest them in areas of the state that we feel like were important for growth. There were several of those that we were supportive of, one of which is $225 million that was invested in sewer and water infrastructure, which is critical. $30 million into rural hospitals. If you look back over the last 20 years or so, we've lost, there's been several hospitals, primarily in the rural regions of the state, that have closed. And as we all know, healthcare is a significant component to any potential growth of any region of our state, particularly in rural Alabama. Of course, $80 million for healthcare and related services, $5 million or so towards telemedicine. But one that I think that everyone can agree on is the investment in broadband and high-speed internet. We've obviously seen the negative impacts that can have, especially during the COVID year and a half or so without high-speed internet. So that investment is critical for the education community, healthcare, economic development, when we're trying to recruit industries to all areas of our state. And so that investment of approximately $85 million was significant for that. But I would say our number one priority was the replenishing of the unemployment trust fund. Mm-hmm. That is a shared tax across all business sectors, small, medium, large. So that $79.5 million that was invested to replenish that fund is going to decrease businesses' shared tax rate for unemployment trust fund by 29%. So that is significant, and that's something that's going to have a positive impact on all businesses throughout the state.
So this is the unemployment compensation fund that when it gets low, basically taxes go up on businesses to replenish it, and so this money was used to let it not get low and keep it high.
That's correct. Right now with that investment, it's almost back up to pre-pandemic status.
I see. Okay. Well, looking back at ARPA, that was a huge issue. You're right. It feels like a long time ago. But that was just one tranche of the ARPA money. There's going to be another one either here in June, July, August. We don't know. Are there any other priorities that you think are important for the state in using the next round of ARPA money?
Right. I think there will be some overlap for what's already been invested in, but it's got to be done the right way. So we've got to make sure that these dollars are being spent wisely and invested wisely. I think you'll see additional dollars go to broadband and toward health care, particularly rural health care. It is these rural hospitals are struggling. Some are being propped up by partners that are larger hospitals, and so there's a partnership there. And so I can think of 3 in rural Alabama now that are being impacted. So I think those are definitely 2 where you'll see additional revenue.
Another big thing that I took away from the session was tax cuts. You think of Alabama as a pretty low tax state, one of the least tax states in the country, really, and yet the legislature found revenues that they said, okay, we're going to cut taxes in this way and that way. Walk me through some of these more significant tax cut legislation.
Right. I'll tell you, I think and give credit to our members of the legislature who have responsibly put programs in place like the Rolling Reserve Act, for the education trust fund budget. And so it's obvious that our state continues to do well, and we appreciate legislative leadership and the sponsors of particular pieces of legislation that are going to go toward helping the business community out, and they've done it in ways that it impacts a broad spectrum of businesses. It's not singling out any industry or particular type business over the other, but one of which is the reduction of the business privilege tax. Mm-hmm. So that reduction is going to be a cost savings of approximately $23 million annually to businesses, but it's going to positively impact approximately 230,000 small businesses throughout the state. Another is the business personal property tax exemption. So businesses are going to be able to be exempt on the first $40,000 of their personal property tax. That is going to have a positive impact on approximately 2,400, primarily small businesses So that's certainly encouraging. One of the ones I'm most excited about is the tax exemption for working families. So if you are, we all remember if you've got children during COVID, it was so challenging to find child care, and fortunately there was a child care tax credit that families could take advantage of through the ARPA bill, the American Rescue Plan bill, and that is going to be a cost savings to working Alabama families of $87 million this year. So those are just a few things that we supported, but certainly appreciate the support of the governor and the members of the legislature for those items.
Mm-hmm. Another big issue this session was the concealed carry permit issue. This is legislation basically doing away with the requirement that gun owners have a concealed carry permit to have a concealed pistol. Lots of revisions were made to this bill, lots of iterations of this bill. I wondered if you could talk about BCA's involvement in this legislation.
Absolutely. You're right. There was a number of gun bills, as we referred to them, introduced in the legislature. We are pro Second Amendment, and we really appreciate the sponsor, Representative Shane Stringer, for getting all groups, a lot of the groups to the table, all groups to the table that would have been impacted by that, the education community, business community, the gun community, et cetera, on. And he did a great job of bringing everybody to the table. You know, our objective in those discussions was just to make sure that businesses could continue to create a safe environment for their customers and for their employees, and we were able to achieve that while still passing an important piece of legislation for Alabama.
Because there's a kind of a fine line between gun rights and property rights, including business property rights.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that was one of the points of conversation, and you know, everybody at the table. Once we got to that point, to that agreement, then it was okay. How do we put it into words, into the legislation? And so we worked through that with the groups of interest, and was able to get to a good place to land.
Well, like I said, the session is over, so we go from State House season, session season, to really campaign season kicks into gear. The election, I think, is 40 days away, at least the primary election. BCA, as much as you are a lobbying organization and here involved in the State House, you're also a campaign organization. I wondered what the campaign landscape is looking like from your perspective.
Right. Thank you for that. I will say this: our endorsement process is a grassroots process. We have regional advisory committees divided all up over the state. Our new executive director of Progress PAC, Drew Harrell, has done just an exceptional job in pulling everything together to get us to a place where we can, now that session's over, go to work on these campaigns. We have endorsed in 113 out of 140 legislative races, and so we are actively working on those as we speak. Obviously, we get involved in all constitutional races, judicial races, et cetera. For a full list of all of our endorsed candidates, you can go to voteforalabamajobs.com and go through there and take a look and see a list of our endorsements. And if you have any questions, your viewers are free to contact our staff anytime.
And we certainly want to have as many of those candidates on the show as possible. I'm curious, once the campaign is over, I'm looking at the House of Representatives specifically. You're going to have a lot of new people, a lot of new lawmakers, a lot of new leadership positions. So once the campaigns are over in November, what is y'all's role? For those new people in the legislature who have not been here to vote, is there a process for trying to, make them understand business issues and kind of push them in the direction you want them to go?
Right, your timing on this is perfect, because we were having this conversation this morning. I will tell you, through our level of engagement with these campaigns and with these candidates, particularly the ones in the open seats that we obviously don't know nearly as well as we do incumbents, just because we've worked with them for so long. But through the campaign process, when we are doing, knocking on doors, in-kind services, working with them and their consultants through the campaign process, you really get to know them. and their spouses and their families. And so throughout those conversations, and getting to know them, it creates a great opportunity for, at that appropriate time after the elections are over, to sit down, and talk about issues that are important to the business community going forward, and really just give them an orientation and give them a chance to ask questions about that. So those are some conversations that we're having internally now.
Well, we'll be watching the campaign trail very closely. David, thanks again for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
Senator, statesman, and U.S. Vice President William Rufus King of Dallas County served in the U.S. Senate for more than 30 years. In 1852, King was elected vice president on the ticket with Franklin Pierce. While recovering from illness in Cuba, King became the only member of the U.S. executive branch to ever have been sworn into office on foreign soil. He passed away less than a month after being inaugurated.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next Friday at 7:30 p.m. right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.